Hello, Reggie here again. It's early. Mm. I wanted to make a brief video. I'm going into work, and because last night it was just rattling around in my head the idea of panspermia, and the rough of it around this theory is the seeding of life from other sources, or seeding of a planet rather, with life from outside sources. I didn't know this until I looked it up, but there's 3 different types, which is fascinating because just the concept by itself is the idea of, a large rock, meteorite, most likely a meteor, traveling through the vastness of space with some kind of frozen bacteria, hitting a planet, that bacteria surviving, and then, growing and developing and evolving into more complex life. I think that's just fascinating to think about. Don't know if it's true, but it's fun to think about. But the reason why I want to make the video is because the 3 different types. There's lithopanspermia. There we go. Where that is between solar systems, where a rock will leave like the Milky Way and hit somewhere else, land on a planet or a moon or something. Whereas ballistic panspermia is intra-solar system, like where a rock from one planet hits another within the same solar system. Good, now it's a little chilly. And which is interesting because, years ago, we suspected something like this had happened from Mars, where in the Antarctic we found a large rock and a crater and evidence of an impact, and they found non-living, unfortunately, but what they believe were remnants of bacteria, which they believed came from Mars. And of course there were those, and there were some who thought, okay, maybe that was just, it had interacted, it had been there for so long that bacteria from Earth just settled on it. But still, the concept was there, very fascinating. It helped spurn our development and search of Mars. We have rovers there, and we're searching. So it's quite fascinating. I'm like, oh snap! And there's more and more evidence suggesting that life could have existed on Mars. There are frozen polar ice caps on the planet. It could have very well had an atmosphere, maybe not maybe not a thick one, but at some point an atmosphere. I even saw special ones where they suggested that it was very similar to Earth. They were both very similar, but it didn't have much of a spin. That didn't help create magnetic fields around the planet, which could not protect said planet from solar radiation and such, whereas ours does. So that's what ate away at the planet, completely made it devoid of life. So anyway, again, lithopanspermia is the traveling between solar systems. Ballistic panspermia is between planets within the same solar system. And then there's a third one. This one is fascinating. This one I really like to think about. It's called directed panspermia. And directed panspermia it's pretty self-explanatory. It means someone, a sentient being or beings, directed such a rock with life on it to a planet. I'm like, huh. I mean, in my opinion, it's really haphazard terraforming, if that's the case. Not even maybe full terraforming. Sorry. But yeah, it's really weird. Like, why would you do that? If you find a hospitable planet, just bring life over. If you're able to manipulate a giant ash rock and put life on it and then direct it into space, I mean, you would think they'd have the ability to at least get to that planet, but whatever, because there's so many variables. Something could hit it on the way there. You'd have to make sure that it got to that planet for it to actually work. Even then, you're not even sure if, assumingly, you're not even sure if the bacteria on the rock you put there will survive. Assuming it can survive, because there are extremophiles, organisms that live in extreme environments that normal other species can't. You have them on Earth. You have some that live at the bottom of the ocean, barely any light, if any at all, extremely cold, lots of pressure. And so who could live there? Well, we know fish live there. we know this with the probes in our little submarines. We've seen what looks like life, and but this particular, okay, well, how would this simple life survive? And let's face it, there's complex life, there has to be simple life. But what they do is we found bacteria next to vents that are open to the Earth's core, so it's generating heat. They're right up on it, and they survive. That's how they pull heat from these vents, thermal vents, and with heat, you know, when there's energy, and energy, there's life. And so yes, not only that, but it's like, okay, well, how can bacteria completely, let's assume we're dealing with ballistic panspermia, where it's from one planet to the other in the same solar system. How could something survive the trip into space? It somehow got on a rock that was jettisoned from the surface of the planet, maybe from another impact. So it survived leaving the planet, and it's in space, but it's frozen. It just freezes, right? And okay, so how does it survive that? Well, we have animals, not a lot, but there are some animals on the planet now that freeze. Like, we have frogs. There are frogs. Don't ask me which ones specifically. I'll have to look it up. But what they do is they run insulin through their body. They kind of have this, like, when they sense that winter is coming, they prep themselves with insulin throughout their bodies, kind of saturate themselves with it. And they do, apparently, like, practice freezes. I think that's what it said. I need to find this article again, because it's just generally very interesting to read. And they freeze themselves, and then when the hard freeze comes, they freeze solid. Like, and any other thing, like if that was a person, they'd be dead. And they freeze for the winter. This isn't a day, isn't a week, it's winter. I'm like, huh, okay. And then the spring comes around, they thaw out and hop away. Like, what? Are you kidding me? We can't do that to people. Why? Because the cells in our bodies explode, basically. The water in our cells crystallize, they expand, and anyone who's done it, or anyone who has kids, and who knows that when you put a glass of water in the freezer, it'll crack. If there's enough water, it'll crack, because the water, it goes from liquid to solid and expands. And admittedly, water is one of the few substances that do that, which is interesting. But yeah, so that's what happens to our cells. Instead of glass, it's our cells. They rupture because it expands and just tears apart the cell. But frogs have literally evolved this feature to where, no, we're just going to freeze, go into a hybrid, like a cryogenic freeze of sorts, and survive it. So we have complex life, because a frog is complex compared to bacteria. So you have that. So bacteria potentially could survive that. But then it has to survive, since it's on this rock, re-entry into an atmosphere. Now that can be tricky, because the heat can get very, very, very hot. Although at the same time, it could, depending on where the bacteria is, if it's inside the rock, you know, it could survive that. It could heat up just enough to help thaw, impact the earth, crumble, you know, the meteorite, destroy itself, but then the bacteria land on Earth, and possibly, or whatever planet, and possibly live and grow. And of course, once it's there, there's no guarantee it will, because, you know, the environment, other creatures, if there are, or whatever, so many different factors can destroy that bacteria. But it's a theory. It's an interesting theory. And especially the idea that a species highly advanced could possibly do this. Again, I wouldn't do it. Why would you leave that much to chance? Especially with all the random X factors and variables in space. You know, no, another rock could hit it and completely throw your plan askew, or you just follow it. But if you're willing to follow the rock, why not just fly to the planet anyway and drop off whatever life you want to seed on that planet? And if you can't land on the planet, because let's say it's a new planet and it's still molten, you wouldn't want to send life there in the first place. It's going to die. So anyway, it's a fascinating theory. And you know, it just kind of goes with what other of the topics I've brought up, the orbs and everything. And it just makes me think of, like, oh, what if these orbs are just like the follow-up? Like, hey, we seeded your planet eons ago. We're seeing how things are going. Oh, look, you have reality TV now. Didn't think that was going to happen, or if that was going to be a thing, but okay, cool, you know. And then, but anyway, but that's just a little mini rant. I got to go in. I'm running close on time. I keep looking at the clock. But yeah, so, you know, chew on that for a little bit. Let me know what you think in the comments below. And yeah. So, you know, this is Reggie. Have a great day, and thank you for watching.